In the frozen heart of Montana Territory, 1886, a desperate widow hired a drifter to save her ranch from land thieves. She thought she was getting a cowboy. He thought he was investigating a criminal. Neither expected to find redemption in each other's arms or that the greatest danger would come from the man they both trusted most. This is the story of how a Pinkerton detective, a grieving widow, and a traumatized boy discovered that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones told by the people we call family. If you love stories where broken souls find healing through courage and unexpected love, hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of the American West. You're not a real cowboy, are you? Woman hires stranger, hiding a dangerous secret. The winter wind cut through Copper Ridge like a blade forged in the Arctic, carrying with it the smell of snow and the promise of harder times ahead. Elena Hartwell stood at the edge of the livestock market, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she studied the men gathered near the hiring post. Most were the usual drifters, men with hollow eyes and empty pockets desperate enough to work through a Montana winter for wages that barely kept body and soul together. She'd interviewed 5 already this morning, and each had proven unsuitable in ways that made her chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to despair. The first had looked at her ranch as though calculating how quickly he could steal her blind. The second had stared at her in a way that made her skin crawl, his eyes lingering where no hired hand's eyes should wander. The third was too old, the fourth too drunk, and the fifth had taken one look at Thomas and made the sign against evil. Her son stood beside her now, a thin boy of 10, with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. Eyes that hadn't lost their intelligence despite 18 months of silence. He clutched his slate and chalk like a lifeline, the only way he had to communicate since the day he watched his father die. One more, Elena murmured more to herself than to Thomas. We'll try one more and then we go home. Thomas tugged on her sleeve and pointed across the market square. Elena followed his gesture to a man standing apart from the other job seekers, his attention seemingly focused on the distant mountains rather than the potential employers passing by. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his worn coat in a way that suggested real strength rather than the false bulk of too many layers. Dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and when he turned his head, she caught a glimpse of a scar running along his left cheekbone. A fighting scar, she thought, or perhaps something worse. But it was his eyes that caught her attention when he finally looked her way. Green as summer grass, they held an intelligence that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. This was a man who noticed things, who calculated and assessed with every glance. Those eyes reminded her dangerously of her late husband during their courting days before ranch life, and secrets had dimmed that bright awareness to something harder and more distant. "Ma'am," the stranger said, touching the brim of his hat as she approached. His voice was rough but educated, another contradiction in a man who seemed built of them. "You're looking for help." "I'm looking for someone who can work cattle in winter conditions and isn't afraid of hard men with harder intentions," Elena replied, her voice carrying the kind of directness that 18 months of widowhood had taught her. "The Harrison Land Company has made it clear they want my property, and they're not particular about their methods." Something flickered in those green eyes. Interest, perhaps, or recognition. "Harrison Land Company," he repeated slowly. "They've been buying up a lot of territory in these parts." "Buying is a generous word for what they do," Elena said. "Threatening, intimidating, and occasionally burning seem more accurate." The stranger nodded as though this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And you need someone willing to stand between you and that." "I need someone willing to do honest work and not run at the first sign of trouble." Elena met his gaze directly. "I can pay $40 a month, room and board included. The work is hard, the hours are long, and you'll be sleeping in the bunkhouse with whatever other hands I can afford to hire." "Just me, then," the stranger said with a slight smile. "At $40 a month, you won't be hiring many others." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. He wasn't wrong, but having her financial desperation stated so plainly stung nonetheless. "The wage is fair for the work," she said stiffly. "I didn't say it wasn't." The stranger's expression softened slightly. "I'm just noting that you're putting a lot of faith in one man to protect a ranch from a land company with deep pockets and no conscience. Do you want the job or not, Mr. Brennan, Lucas Brennan?" He extended a hand that was calloused, but not in the way a lifetime cowboy's hands would be. Elena noticed this, but filed it away for later consideration. And yes, ma'am, I want the job. $40 a month is generous pay, and I could use the work. His handshake was firm, his palm warm despite the cold. Lena found herself holding on a moment longer than necessary before pulling back with what she hoped was professional distance. Thomas tugged on her sleeve again, holding up his slate. In his careful, childish handwriting, he'd written, "He's not bad like the others." Elena's breath caught. Thomas had been wary of strangers since his father's death, communicating his distrust through body language and the occasional tersely written message. For him to actively approve of someone was unprecedented. "My son thinks you're trustworthy," she said, watching Lucas Brennan's reaction carefully. The stranger's expression shifted as he looked down at Thomas, something gentle replacing the careful calculation she'd seen before. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level in a gesture that spoke of experience with frightened children. "What's your name, son?" he asked quietly. Thomas hesitated, then wrote on his slate, "Thomas Hartwell. I don't talk anymore." "That's all right," Lucas said without missing a beat. "Sometimes the important things don't need words. I knew a Sioux scout once who could tell you everything you needed to know about a man just by watching how he sat his horse." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. He wrote quickly, "Did you fight Indians?" "I served in the cavalry for a few years," Lucas replied carefully. "But I spent more time talking with the tribes than fighting them. Turns out most people just want to be left alone to live their lives in peace." Elena felt something in her chest loosen slightly. This man, whoever he really was, understood how to speak to a traumatized child without condescension or pity. "Can you start today?" she heard herself asking. "We're 5 miles north of town, and I'd like to get back before the snow starts." Lucas stood, his expression thoughtful. "I'll need to collect my gear from the boarding house. Give me an hour. Meet me at the general store. We need supplies anyway." Elena extended her hand again, sealing the bargain. "Welcome to the Hartwell Ranch, Mr. Brennan." As she and Thomas walked toward the general store, she felt her son's hand slip into hers. When she looked down, he was smiling for the first time in months, a small, tentative expression that made her heart ache with hope and fear in equal measure. She just hired a stranger to protect her home and family. A stranger with educated speech, in a cowboy's appearance, with gentle eyes and fighting scars, with answers that felt carefully calculated, in a manner that seemed almost too perfect. But what choice did she have? The Harrison Land Company was closing in her foreman. Jake Morrison had warned her just yesterday that more pressure was coming and winter was no time to run a 5,000-acre ranch alone. She needed help, and Lucas Brennan was offering exactly that. Even if every instinct she possessed whispered that he was far more than he appeared to be. The ride back to the ranch took 90 minutes through snow that had started falling in thick, lazy flakes. Lucas Brennan rode beside the wagon with an ease that seemed practiced, but not quite natural, Elena noticed. He sat his horse well enough, but there was something military in his posture, something that spoke of cavalry training rather than years of cattle work. Thomas sat between them on the wagon bench, alternating between watching the road ahead and studying their new employee with the kind of intensity that made Elena wonder what her son saw that she was missing. "How long have you been ranching, Mrs. Hartwell?" Lucas asked as they crested a hill that revealed the valley below. 18 months as a widow," Elena replied, keeping her eyes on the road. "But I learned the business during my husband's illness. He had consumption for 2 years before the accident." She felt Lucas's attention sharpen at the word accident, though his tone remained casual. "That must have been difficult, learning to run a ranch while nursing a sick husband." Difficult doesn't begin to describe it. Elena allowed some of the bitterness she usually kept locked away to creep into her voice. "But it taught me that I'm stronger than I thought. Stronger than my husband ever believed I could be. He underestimated you. Most men do." Elena glanced at him sideways. "I was raised in Denver, daughter of a banker. I was supposed to marry well, host dinner parties and produce heirs. Instead, I married a rancher who brought me to Montana and expected me to be decorative rather than useful. But you proved him wrong. I had to. When he got sick, someone needed to learn how to read the account books, negotiate with buyers, and manage the hands." Elena's hands tightened on the reins. "By the time he died, I knew more about running the Hartwell Ranch than he'd ever bothered to teach me." Thomas wrote something on his slate and held it up. Mama knows everything about the ranch. Lucas smiled at the boy. I can see that. Your mother seems like a formidable woman. Formidable, Elena repeated. That's a polite way of saying difficult. That's a polite way of saying capable, Lucas corrected. There's a difference. Elena felt an unexpected warmth at the words. In the 18 months since Charles's death, she'd been called stubborn, unreasonable, and unwomanly by nearly everyone from the banker in town to the preacher's wife. No one had called her capable. There, she said, pointing ahead as the ranch house came into view. That's home. The Hartwell Ranch spread across the valley like a promise of prosperity that had never quite been fulfilled. The main house was solid timber construction, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn was larger, built to shelter livestock through Montana's brutal winters. Beyond that were the bunkhouse, the smokehouse, and various outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch in its prime, or what should have been its prime. Elena saw it through a stranger's eyes and noticed what 18 months of struggle had done. Paint peeling on the porch rails, fence lines that needed mending, the subtle signs of a property being worked by too few hands with too little time. It's a good layout, Lucas observed, and Elena heard genuine appreciation in his voice. Good water source, natural windbreaks in that southern exposure for the winter pastures. You know ranching, Elena said, surprised. I know land, Lucas replied carefully. I've worked enough different places to recognize good bones when I see them. They rode into the yard just as a man emerged from the barn. Jake Morrison had been Charles's foreman for 10 years and had stayed on after his death, one of the few hands who hadn't abandoned the ranch when the threats from Harrison Land Company started. He was a solid man in his late 40s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. Elena had always found him reliable, steady, and utterly loyal to the ranch. Elena, Jake said, touching his hat brim. His eyes moved to Lucas with careful assessment. You found someone. Jake Morrison, meet Lucas Brennan. He's agreed to help with the winter work. Elena climbed down from the wagon, noting how Jake's expression remained neutral but watchful. Lucas Jake is our foreman. He knows this ranch better than anyone. The 2 men shook hands with the kind of careful courtesy that suggested mutual wariness. Elena filed this away as well, another piece of information to examine when she had time to think. I'll show you to the bunkhouse, Jake said to Lucas. Get you settled before dark. I'd appreciate that. Lucas turned to Elena with a slight nod. Ma'am, Thomas. As the 2 men walked toward the bunkhouse, Thomas tugged on Elena's sleeve and held up his slate. I like him, but he has secrets. Elena looked down at her son with a mixture of pride and concern. Thomas had always been perceptive, even before the trauma that had stolen his voice. Now that perception seemed heightened, sharpened by the necessity of observing when he couldn't speak. Everyone has secrets, sweetheart, she murmured, ruffling his dark hair. The question is whether those secrets will hurt us or help us. She watched Lucas Brennan disappear into the bunkhouse with Jake Morrison and wondered which kind of secrets she'd just invited onto her property. That night, Lucas lay on the narrow bunk in the ranch's bunkhouse and stared at the ceiling, mentally composing the report he'd need to send to his Pinkerton supervisor in Denver. Target property confirmed as Hartwell Ranch, 5,000 acres in Copper Ridge Valley. Owner is widow Elena Hartwell, age approximately 32, with 1 son, Thomas, age 10. Son is mute, possibly traumatized. Widow claims her late husband died in riding accident 18 months ago. Local records support this claim, but circumstances warrant further investigation. Foreman Jake Morrison has been with the ranch for 10 years. His loyalty to the widow appears genuine, but his reaction to my arrival suggests wariness of strangers. This could be normal caution or indication of something to hide. Property is being pressured by Harrison Land Company to sell. Widow is resisting. This could provide cover for investigation as it gives logical reason for my presence as hired protection. Initial assessment. Widow appears genuinely unaware of smuggling operation. However, she is intelligent and observant. Maintaining cover will require careful management. Lucas closed his eyes and tried not to think about the way Elena Hartwell had looked at him when he'd knelt to speak with her son. There had been something in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the capable exterior, a loneliness that matched his own. He was here to investigate gun smuggling, not to develop feelings for a woman who might be complicit in criminal activity. But God help him, when Thomas had smiled for the first time in months and Elena's face had lit up with hope. Lucas had felt something in his chest that he'd thought died 7 years ago, when his own family was taken from him. He had a job to do, evidence to gather, a smuggling operation to expose. He couldn't afford to care about the widow and her traumatized son, even if every instinct he possessed was already screaming at him that Elena Hartwell was exactly what she appeared to be, a good woman trying to survive impossible circumstances with courage and dignity. Lucas pushed the thoughts away and focused on his mission. Tomorrow he'd begin his real investigation. Tonight he needed to remember why he was here. The sound of footsteps outside the bunkhouse brought him instantly alert. Through the window he could see a figure moving toward the barn, keeping to the shadows with the kind of care that suggested they didn't want to be seen. Lucas rose silently and moved to get a better view. The figure was male, medium height, wearing a heavy coat. Not Jake Morrison, the foreman was taller. Someone else then coming to the ranch under cover of darkness. This was it, the confirmation he needed that something illegal was happening on Hartwell property. Lucas dressed quickly and slipped out of the bunkhouse, following at a distance that kept him hidden, while still allowing him to observe. The figure entered the barn through a side door, and Lucas positioned himself near a window that gave him a view of the interior. What he saw made his blood run cold. Wooden crates stacked in the far corner, partially hidden by hay bales. The midnight visitor was prying one open with a crowbar, the wood creaking in the quiet night. When the lid came off, Lucas saw what he'd been sent to find. Winchester rifles, dozens of them packed in straw and cosmoline. Weapons that were supposed to be in army arsenals, not hidden in a Montana ranch barn. The smuggling operation was real. The intelligence that had brought him here was accurate. But as Lucas watched the unknown man check the rifles with practiced efficiency, he found himself hoping desperately that Elena Hartwell had no idea these weapons were on her property. Because if she was involved in this, if she was part of the conspiracy to arm Canadian insurgents with stolen American weapons, then everything he'd seen today, the courage, the love for her son, the determined dignity, was a lie. And Lucas discovered that he very much wanted Elena Hartwell to be exactly what she appeared to be, even if it meant his investigation just became infinitely more complicated. The barn door creaked and Lucas tensed, ready to retreat to the shadows. But it wasn't the mysterious visitor leaving. It was Elena Hartwell herself, dressed in a heavy robe, carrying a rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. "Step away from those crates," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the barn with perfect clarity, "and put your hands where I can see them." The man turned slowly and Lucas got his first good look at the intruder's face. Young, maybe 25, with the kind of rough features that came from hard living. Not one of the ranch hands Lucas had seen during the day. "Mrs. Hartwell," the man said, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "I was just stealing rifles from my barn." Elena's voice was ice. "Or just using my property to store weapons I know nothing about." The confirmation that Elena was unaware of the smuggling sent relief flooding through Lucas. She was innocent. Whatever was happening on her ranch, she wasn't part of it. "You don't understand," the intruder said. Jake said what?" Elena's grip on the rifle tightened. "That he could use my barn without my knowledge. That he could hide illegal weapons on my property, and I'd never notice." So Jake Morrison was involved. The loyal foreman who'd stayed when others left, who'd been with the ranch for 10 years. He was the one smuggling weapons through Hartwell property. Lucas's mind raced through the implications. If Jake had been doing this during Charles Hartwell's lifetime, had the husband known? Was that why he died? Not an accident, but murder to keep him quiet. "I'm just making a delivery." "Yeah, delivery," the man said, edging toward the door. "I don't want any trouble, ma'am." "Then you shouldn't have brought illegal weapons onto my property." Elena's voice remained steady, but Lucas could hear the fear beneath it now. She was alone, facing down a criminal with no one to call for help. Except she wasn't alone. Lucas stepped out of the shadows, his own weapon drawn, and aimed at the intruder with the kind of professional competence that came from years of training. "The lady asked you to step away from the crates," he said quietly. "I suggest you comply." Both Elena and the intruder spun toward him. In Elena's eyes, Lucas saw surprised fear and something that might have been relief. In the intruder's eyes, he saw calculation and the beginning of panic. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded. "I'm the new hired hand," Lucas replied calmly, and I'm very good at following my employer's instructions, which currently involve making sure you leave this property immediately and don't come back. Jake's not going to like this, the intruder said, but he was already backing toward the door. Jake can take it up with me, Elena said, her voice hardening. Tell him I want to see him first thing tomorrow morning, and tell him to bring an explanation for why there are stolen weapons in my barn. The intruder fled into the night, leaving Lucas and Elena alone in the barn with the evidence of a smuggling operation she clearly knew nothing about. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The barn was silent except for the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the wind rattling the roof timbers. Finally, Elena lowered her rifle and looked at Lucas with eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough trust. "You're not a real cowboy, are you?" she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered with the kind of weary resignation that suggested she'd suspected from the beginning, but had been desperate enough to ignore her instincts. Lucas considered his options. He could lie, could maintain his cover, could continue the deception that was his job. But looking at Elena Hartwell, standing alone in her barn surrounded by evidence that her trusted foreman had been using her property for criminal activity, trying to hold on to her courage and her dignity, and her ranch all at once, Lucas found he couldn't add another lie to the burdens she was already carrying. "No," he admitted, "I'm not." Elena nodded as though this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Then who are you, really?" Lucas made a decision that would probably cost him his job and possibly his life. But he'd spent 7 years living with the ghosts of his failures, and he couldn't add Elena Hartwell's betrayed trust to that haunted roster. "My name is Michael Reeves," he said quietly. "I'm a Pinkerton detective, and I was sent here to investigate gun smuggling through your ranch to Canadian insurgents." The color drained from Elena's face. "You think I'm involved in smuggling?" "I did when I arrived this morning." Lucas held her gaze steadily. "I don't add any more." "How generous of you." Elena's voice was bitter. "You've known me all of 12 hours, and you've already determined I'm not a criminal. Should I be grateful?" "You should be angry," Lucas replied. "I came here under false pretenses. I lied to you and your son. I took a job in your home while planning to investigate you for federal crimes." "Yes," Elena's hands tightened on her rifle. "You did all of those things, so why are you telling me the truth now?" "Because you deserve to know what you're dealing with." Lucas gestured toward the crates of weapons. "Those rifles are stolen from army arsenals. They're being smuggled north to arm insurgents in Canada who want to overthrow British rule. The men doing this are dangerous, well-organized, and very good at covering their tracks. And my foreman is one of them." "It appears so." Elena closed her eyes and Lucas saw her sway slightly. He moved instinctively to steady her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't pretend to care when you came here to destroy me." "I didn't come here to destroy you. I came here to stop a criminal operation." Lucas kept his distance, respecting her boundary even as every instinct urged him to offer comfort. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Elena opened her eyes and Lucas saw tears glistening there, though she refused to let them fall. "You would have investigated me, gathered evidence, had me arrested and tried for crimes I knew nothing about. My son would have been taken away, my ranch confiscated, my name destroyed." "Yes," Lucas agreed, "and because there was no point in lying about it. If I'd found evidence of your involvement, that's exactly what would have happened. And now I know you're innocent. Now my investigation focuses on finding out who else is involved and how deep this operation goes." Lucas paused. "But Elena, you need to understand something. The men doing this will kill to protect their operation." "Your husband's accident wasn't an accident," Elena finished, her voice hollow. "Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying it's possible. If Charles knew about the smuggling, if he tried to stop it or threatened to expose it, then Jake would have killed him." Elena's legs finally gave out and she sank onto a hay bale. "Jake Morrison, who taught my husband how to brand cattle when they were both young men. Jake, who stayed loyal when everyone else abandoned the ranch. Jake, who's been like an uncle to Thomas." "I'm sorry," Lucas said and meant it. "Sorry doesn't help." Elena looked up at him with eyes that held a devastation he recognized from his own mirror. "You came here to investigate me for crimes I didn't commit. You lied to my son. You planned to destroy my life. and now you want me to trust you. No, Lucas said honestly. I want you to use me. I'm already here. You're already established as your hired hand. Work with me to expose Jake Morrison and whoever else is involved in this operation. Help me gather the evidence we need to shut down the smuggling and protect your ranch. And what do I get in return? Your ranch stays yours, your son stays with you, your name stays clear. Lucas moved closer, crouching down so he was at her eye level. And the men who killed your husband face justice. Wamis? Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for something Lucas wasn't sure he could provide. Trust, perhaps, or the promise that he wouldn't betray her again. I need proof, she said finally, about my husband's death. I need to know for certain whether Jake killed him. I'll find it, Lucas promised. And when this is over, when you've gathered your evidence and arrested everyone involved, you'll leave. You'll go back to whatever Pinkerton office sent you here, and you'll never think about the widow and boy you used to build your case. The accusation stung because it was probably true, or would have been true before tonight, before Lucas had seen Elena Hartwell face down an armed intruder with nothing but courage and a rifle, before he'd watched her absorb the betrayal of a trusted friend without breaking, before he'd recognized in her the same bone-deep loneliness he'd been carrying since his own family died. Probably he admitted, because lying to her now would be worse than any deception he had already committed. Elena nodded as though this confirmed everything she'd expected. Then we have an arrangement, Mr. Reeves. You help me prove Jake Morrison's involvement in my husband's death, and I'll help you expose the smuggling operation. But don't pretend this is anything more than a business arrangement. Don't pretend to care about me or my son when you're just using us to close a case. Fair enough, Lucas said, even though the words felt like shards of glass in his throat. Good. Elena stood her composure, returning like armor she'd learned to wear. Tomorrow I'll confront Jake about the weapons. We'll see what he has to say. That's dangerous, Lucas protested. If he's already killed once. This is my ranch, Mr. Reeves, my son's future, my husband's murder to avenge. Elena's voice was steel wrapped in ice. I won't hide in my house while you play detective. If we're doing this, we're doing it as partners. Lucas recognized the futility of arguing. Elena Hartwell had been underestimated and dismissed her entire life. She wasn't going to accept being sidelined now, especially not in matters concerning her own property and family. Partners, he agreed, but you follow my lead on anything dangerous. I've been doing this for 7 years, and I've seen what men like Jake Morrison can do when they're cornered. And I've been surviving as a widow in Montana territory for 18 months. I know something about danger, too. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, two people who'd just agreed to an alliance built on necessity rather than trust, united by a common goal, but divided by the lies that had brought them together. There's one more thing, Elena said as Lucas turned to leave. Thomas knows you're hiding something. He wrote it on his slate this afternoon. My son is perceptive in ways most people don't understand. If you're going to be in our lives, even temporarily, he deserves some version of the truth. What do you want me to tell him? Tell him you're a detective investigating bad men. Tell him you're here to help us. Elena's voice softened slightly. Tell him you're one of the good guys, even if you did lie to get here. Am I, Lucas asked. A good guy? Elena looked at him for a long moment. I don't know yet, but my son thinks you are, and Thomas has better instincts about people than anyone I've ever known. So I'm choosing to believe him, at least for now. Thank you, Lucas said. Don't thank me. Just find out who killed my husband and get those weapons off my property before they bring more danger to my door. As Lucas walked back to the bunkhouse through the falling snow, he found himself thinking about the woman he'd left standing alone in the barn. Elena Hartwell was stronger than any widow he'd ever encountered, braver than most men he'd served with in the cavalry, and more determined to protect her family than anyone had a right to be. She was also completely alone, fighting battles on multiple fronts, with no allies except a detective who'd lied to her and a son who couldn't speak. Lucas had come to Montana to close a case, to expose a smuggling operation and advance his career with the Pinkerton agency. But somewhere between this morning's hiring and tonight's confrontation in the barn, the mission had become personal. He was going to find out who killed Charles Hartwell. He was going to expose Jake Morrison and everyone else involved in the smuggling operation. And he was going to make damn sure that Elena and Thomas Hartwell were safe and protected when the dust settled, even if it cost him everything he'd built in the 7 years since his own family died. Because some things mattered more than cases and careers. Some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible, and the cost was everything you had. Elena Hartwell and her son were those things. And Lucas Reeves was done running from the possibility of caring about someone again. Morning came to the Hartwell Ranch wrapped in fresh snow and the kind of bitter cold that made every breath visible. Lucas was up before dawn, his cavalry training making early rising as natural as breathing. He'd spent most of the night thinking about Elena's plan to confront Jake Morrison and trying to devise a strategy that would keep her safe while gathering the evidence they needed. He found her already in the barn, feeding the horses with the kind of methodical efficiency that spoke of years of routine. Thomas was with her, carrying buckets of water with serious concentration, his slate and chalk tucked into his coat pocket. "You should have waited for me," Lucas said as he approached. "If Jake comes back, then I'll deal with him." Elena didn't look up from her work. "This is my barn, Mr. Reeves. I'm not going to start hiding in my own home because someone's using my property for criminal activity." Thomas looked up at Lucas and held up his slate. "Mama is brave, but she's also scared." Elena's hand stilled on the hay fork. "Thomas, it's okay to be both," Lucas said, gently directing his words to the boy, but knowing they were meant for Elena as well. "The bravest people I've ever known were also the ones who understood what they had to lose." Thomas considered this, then wrote, "Mama says you're a detective, like in the dime novels." "Something like that." Lucas knelt down to the boy's level just as he had yesterday in the market. "But the real work is a lot less exciting than the stories. Mostly it's about watching, listening, and paying attention to details that other people miss." "I'm good at that," Thomas wrote. "Because I can't talk, I notice things." "I've noticed that about you." Lucas smiled. "You see things other people miss because you're watching instead of talking." Thomas's face brightened with the kind of pleasure that came from being understood. He wrote quickly, "What should I watch for?" "Thomas, no," Elena interrupted. "You're not getting involved in this investigation. It's too dangerous." "Mrs. Hartwell," Lucas said carefully. "With all due respect, Thomas is already involved. He lives here. He sees what happens on this ranch. And from what I've observed, he's perceptive enough that he's probably already noticed things that could help us." Elena's jaw tightened. "He's 10 years old. He's 10 years old and traumatized because he watched his father die." Lucas replied gently. "I'm not suggesting we put him in danger. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that he's intelligent, observant, and already paying attention. We can use that or we can ignore it, but either way, he's part of this situation." Thomas tugged on his mother's sleeve and held up his slate. "I want to help catch the bad men. Papa would want me to help." Elena closed her eyes and Lucas saw her struggle with the same protective instincts that had probably driven every decision she'd made for the past 18 months. She wanted to keep Thomas safe, to shield him from the darknesses that had already touched his young life. But safety was an illusion. The darkness was already here, hidden in their barn, wearing the face of a trusted friend. "All right," Elena said, finally opening her eyes. "But you don't take any risks, Thomas. You observe and report nothing more." "Understood." Thomas nodded solemnly and wrote, "I promise. What should I watch for?" Lucas thought about this carefully. What could a 10-year-old safely observe that might help their investigation? "Watch who comes to the barn when they think no one is looking," he said. "Pay attention to anyone who seems nervous or acts differently around certain people. And most importantly, if you see anything that scares you or seems wrong, you find your mother or me immediately." Thomas nodded again, his expression serious with the weight of this new responsibility. The sound of footsteps crunching through snow made all three of them turn. Jake Morrison was approaching the barn, his face its usual weathered neutrality showing no sign that he knew anything was wrong. "Morning, Elena," he said, touching his hat brim. "Brennan, young Thomas." Lucas watched the foreman carefully cataloging every detail. Jake's hands were steady, his voice calm, his body language relaxed. Either he didn't know his midnight visitor had been caught, or he was a very good actor. "Jake, Elena said, her voice carefully neutral. I need to speak with you, in private. Something flickered in Jake's eye, wariness perhaps, or calculation. Of course. Is something wrong? That depends on your explanation. Elena handed the hay fork to Lucas. Mr. Reeves, would you finish the feeding? Thomas can help you. Thomas started to protest, but Lucas laid a hand on his shoulder. Come on, let's give them privacy. As Elena and Jake walked toward the ranch house, Thomas wrote frantically on his slate, we should follow them. What if he hurts Mama? Your mother is armed and capable, Lucas said, though he was calculating distances and reaction times even as he spoke. And she's right, this conversation needs to happen. But we'll keep watch from here, all right. They worked in silence for several minutes, both of them glancing toward the house where Elena and Jake had disappeared. Lucas positioned himself so he could see the kitchen window, ready to intervene if things turned violent. Thomas tugged on his sleeve and held up his slate. Mr. Jake has been acting strange for the last month. Lucas's attention sharpened. Strange how? Nervous, jumpy. He comes to the barn late at night. Thomas wrote quickly, his child's handwriting cramped with urgency. And he told Mama we should sell the ranch to Harrison Company. Said it would be safer for us. The pieces were clicking together. Jake Morrison wanted Elena to sell the ranch, probably because Harrison Land Company was involved in the smuggling operation, or at least knew about it, and wanted the property as a transfer point. When Elena refused to sell, Jake had continued using the property anyway, banking on her isolation and her presumed ignorance to keep the operation running. But then Charles Hartwell had discovered the smuggling. Maybe he'd confronted Jake. Maybe he'd threatened to expose the operation. And Jake had killed him, making it look like a riding accident. Thomas, Lucas said carefully, the day your father died, you were there, weren't you? The boy's face went pale, but he nodded. Did you see what happened? Thomas's hands shook as he wrote on his slate, the chalk making scratchy sounds in the quiet barn. When he held it up, Lucas felt his blood run cold. Mr. Jake hit Papa's horse with a stick, made it throw him. Papa hit his head on a rock. Mr. Jake said it was an accident and I should never tell anyone what I saw. There it was, the confession from a traumatized child who'd been carrying this terrible secret for 18 months. Jake Morrison had murdered Charles Hartwell in front of his own son, then threatened the boy into silence. No wonder Thomas had stopped speaking. The weight of that secret would have crushed anyone, let alone a child. Thomas, Lucas said gently, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. You are the bravest person I've ever met. Do you know that? Thomas shook his head, tears streaming down his face. You are. Because you've been carrying this terrible knowledge alone, trying to protect your mother, trying to be strong, even when you were terrified. Lucas pulled the boy into a careful hug. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'm here now, and I'm going to make sure Jake Morrison answers for what he did. Thomas clung to him, his thin body shaking with silent sobs. Lucas held him and thought about his own daughter lost 7 years ago and felt the old grief mixed with new purpose. He was going to protect this child. He was going to give Elena Hartwell the justice she deserved. And he was going to make damn sure Jake Morrison spent the rest of his life in prison for murder. The kitchen door opened and Elena emerged, her face pale but composed. Jake followed her, his expression darker than Lucas had seen before. Brennan, Jake called out. A word. Lucas stood, keeping Thomas behind him. Stay here, he murmured to the boy. If anything happens, run to the house and lock the doors. Thomas nodded, his slate clutched to his chest like a shield. Lucas walked toward the house, every sense alert, his hand resting casually near the gun he'd taken to wearing since last night's encounter. Jake stood on the porch, his posture tense, his eyes cold. Elena tells me you caught someone in the barn last night, Jake said without preamble. Someone messing with crates you claim contain stolen weapons. I don't claim anything, Lucas replied calmly. I saw Winchester rifles packed in cosmoline. Either you're running a gun shop out of Mrs. Hartwell's barn, or those weapons are stolen federal property. And what business is it of yours? I work for Mrs. Hartwell. Her business is my business. Lucas held Jake's gaze steadily, especially when someone's using her property for criminal activity that could get her arrested or killed. Jake's jaw tightened. You're awful knowledgeable about criminal activity for a simple cowboy. I've been around, Lucas said with a shrug. Seen a lot in my time. I bet you have. Jake stepped down from the porch, moving into Lucas's personal space with the kind of territorial aggression that was meant to intimidate. Question is, who are you really? Because I've known a lot of cowboys in my time, and you don't move like one. You don't talk like one, and you sure as hell don't handle yourself like one. Maybe I'm just more educated than most, Lucas replied, refusing to back down. Or maybe you're a federal agent. Jake's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Maybe you're here investigating something that's none of your damn business. If I were a federal agent, you'd already be in chains, Lucas pointed out. I'm just a man trying to do an honest day's work and protect my employer from getting caught up in someone else's criminal enterprise. For a long moment, the two men faced each other in silence, each calculating odds and assessing threats. Lucas could feel the violence simmering beneath Jake's surface, could see the moment the foreman decided whether to fight or retreat. This isn't over, Jake said finally. You might think you're helping Elena, but you're making things worse. The people involved in this operation, they don't take kindly to interference. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who's trying to keep this family safe. Jake's expression softened slightly, and Lucas saw genuine emotion beneath the criminal exterior. I've known Elena since she was a bride, watched Thomas grow from a baby. I don't want to see them hurt. Then why are you using their property for smuggling? Lucas demanded. Why are you putting them at risk? Because the alternative is worse. Jake glanced toward the house where Elena stood watching from the window. Harrison Land Company wants this ranch. They'll do whatever it takes to get it. Burn buildings, kill livestock, worse. The only thing keeping them at bay is my connection to the smuggling operation. As long as they think they can use this property, they leave Elena alone. Lucas felt the logic of this twisted reasoning, even as he rejected it. So you're protecting her by implicating her in federal crimes. I'm protecting her by keeping her alive. Jake's voice carried the weight of conviction. And if that means using her barn without her knowledge, then that's what I'll do. Charles knew, though, didn't he? Lucas watched Jake's face carefully. He found out what you were doing, and you killed him to keep him quiet. Jake's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. You can't prove that. I can prove you've been smuggling weapons through this ranch. I can prove you've been lying to Elena Hartwell for at least 18 months. Lucas kept his voice low and dangerous. And when federal agents start investigating, they're going to ask a lot of questions about Charles Hartwell's convenient accident. Charles was my friend, Jake said, and Lucas heard genuine grief in his voice. I didn't want any of this to happen. But it did happen, and now you have a choice. Lucas glanced toward the barn where Thomas was watching with whitish, frightened eyes. You can come clean, tell the truth about the smuggling operation and who else is involved. Or you can keep lying, keep using this family, and eventually get them all killed when your criminal associates decide Elena knows too much. Jake stood silent for a long moment, his weathered face showing the strain of impossible choices. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The people running this operation, they have connections everywhere. Judges, marshals, territorial officials. If I tell you what I know, I'm a dead man. If you don't tell us Elena and Thomas are dead, Lucas countered, is that really what you want? For the family you claim to care about to pay for your crimes? Jake's shoulders slumped, and suddenly he looked every one of his 40-some years and then some. What do you want to know? Everything, Lucas said, starting with who killed Charles Hartwell and why. They moved the conversation to the ranch house kitchen, where Elena had coffee brewing and the kind of tense atmosphere that came before confessions. Thomas sat at the table with his slate, his young face solemn as he watched Jake Morrison prepare to reveal truths that would change everything. Before I start, Jake said, looking at Elena with something that might have been remorse, I want you to know I never meant for any of this to touch you. I've been trying to keep you safe, even if my methods were wrong. Just tell the truth, Elena replied, her voice hard. I'll decide later whether your intentions matter. Jake nodded and began. The smuggling operation started 5 years ago. Harrison Land Company is a front for a group of investors who are arming Canadian insurgents. They want to overthrow British rule in Canada and establish an independent republic that will be friendly to American business interests. Lucas felt a chill. This was bigger than he'd thought, not just gun smuggling, but an organized attempt to destabilize a foreign government. The weapons come from corrupt Army supply officers who report them as lost or damaged. Jake continued. They're shipped to various ranches along the northern border, stored temporarily, then moved across to Canada during the winter when the border is less monitored. And you volunteered the Hartwell Ranch for this? Elena's voice shook with controlled fury. Charles volunteered it, Jake said quietly. 10 years ago when the ranch was struggling. Harrison Company offered him $500 a month to store crates in the barn, no questions asked. That money kept this ranch afloat through 2 bad winters and a drought. Elena's face went white. My husband was part of this. He thought it was just smuggling luxury goods to avoid tariffs. Fancy furniture, expensive liquor, things rich people buy to avoid taxes. Jake's expression was pained. He didn't know about the weapons until 2 years ago when he got sick and started going through the ranch's financial records more carefully. And when he found out, he confronted me, said he wanted out, that he wouldn't be part of arming insurgents. Jake's hands tightened on his coffee cup. I told him we were in too deep, that you can't just quit an operation like this. But Charles insisted. He said once he was gone, you'd sell the ranch and move back to Denver, and the smuggling could be someone else's problem. Thomas wrote on his slate with shaking hands. Papa didn't know he was going to die. No, son, he didn't. Jake's voice broke. The consumption was supposed to take him within months. The doctors said his lungs were failing. He was planning to make it through one more winter, and then nature would take its course. Elena's hand covered her mouth. But he didn't die of consumption. No. Jake looked at Thomas, and Lucas saw genuine anguish in the foreman's eyes. The people running this operation found out Charles wanted to quit. They sent someone to convince him to change his mind. I told them I'd handle it, that I'd make Charles see reason, but they didn't trust me. So they killed him, Lucas said flatly. They made it look like an accident. Spooked his horse on the ridge trail where the rocks are sharpest. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Thomas was with him. Saw the whole thing. I found them both afterward, Charles dead. Thomas in shock, unable to speak. Thomas was crying silently, tears streaming down his face as he wrote on his slate. You told me never to tell. You said they would kill Mama if I told. I know, son, I know. Jake's own eyes were wet. I've been trying to protect you both ever since. Keeping the operation running so Harrison Company wouldn't turn on you, lying to Elena, so she wouldn't ask questions that would get her killed. You should have told me the truth, Elena said, her voice shaking. You should have trusted me to handle it. Would you have believed me? Would you have accepted that your dying husband had gotten involved with gun smugglers? Jake met her eyes. Or would you have gone to the authorities, started an investigation that would have gotten you both killed before anyone could help you? Elena had no answer to this because Jake was probably right. If he'd told her the truth 18 months ago, she would have gone to the territorial marshal, and she and Thomas would likely be dead. It was a terrible calculation, but Lucas understood it. Sometimes protecting people meant lying to them, and sometimes love looked like betrayal. Who else is involved? Lucas asked, bringing the conversation back to his investigation. You mentioned corrupt officials. I need names. Jake laughed bitterly. Names won't help you. The men running this operation are powerful enough to make federal agents disappear. They have judges on payroll, marshals who look the other way, and enough money to buy their way out of any investigation. Let me worry about that, Lucas said. Just give me the names. For the next hour, Jake Morrison laid out a conspiracy that reached from Montana ranches to Canadian rebel camps, from Army supply depots to the offices of territorial government. He named names, detailed payment structures, and described how the operation had grown from a small smuggling scheme into a full-scale attempt to arm a foreign insurgency. Lucas committed every detail to memory, already composing the report he'd send to Pinkerton headquarters. This was bigger than one case, bigger than his career. This was the kind of investigation that could topple governments and end criminal enterprises that had operated for years. But it was also the kind of investigation that could get everyone involved killed. There's one more thing you need to know, Jake said as his confession wound down. Harrison Land Company is sending a representative here tomorrow. They want to make Elena a final offer for the ranch. And if I refuse, Elena asked, then they'll stop being polite about acquiring the property. Jake's expression was grim. They need this ranch, Elena. The location is perfect for their smuggling route. The barn is already set up, and they've invested too much to just walk away. So they'll kill me and take it anyway. They'll make it look like an accident, a barn fire maybe, or a robbery gone wrong. Jake's voice was flat with certainty. They've done it before to other ranchers who wouldn't cooperate. Thomas wrote on his slate, "We have to run away, like in the stories." "No," Elena said firmly. "This is our home, Thomas. I won't let criminals chase us from our land." "Then you need protection," Jake said. "Real protection, not just a hired hand with a gun." He looked at Lucas. "Who are you really? Because if you're going to keep this family safe, I need to know you're capable of it." Lucas made a decision. Jake Morrison had just confessed to participating in a criminal conspiracy that had resulted in at least one murder. But he'd also spent 18 months trying to protect Elena and Thomas in the only way he knew how. That counted for something. "My real name is Michael Reeves," Lucas said. "I'm a Pinkerton detective investigating the gun smuggling operation. I was sent here to gather evidence and identify everyone involved." Jake nodded slowly. "I figured it was something like that. You move like a lawman, think like one too." "Can you protect them?" Elena asked Lucas directly. "When Harrison Company comes tomorrow with their threats and their violence, can you keep us safe?" Lucas looked at her across the kitchen table at this woman who'd been betrayed by her husband, lied to by her foreman, and threatened by criminals, but who still stood straight and asked direct questions with her chin held high. "Yes," he said simply, "I can protect you. I will protect you." "How sure?" Thomas wrote. "There's only one of you and many of them." "Because I'm not alone anymore." Lucas looked at Jake. "Are you with us? Really with us, not just playing both sides?" Jake was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I've been waiting for a chance to get out of this operation for 2 years. If you can promise to keep Elena and Thomas safe, I'll tell you everything I know and testify against everyone involved, even if it means prison time for you." "I'm already living in a prison," Jake said quietly. "At least this way it'll be one I deserve." Elena stood and moved to the window, looking out at the ranch she'd fought so hard to keep. When she turned back, her expression was resolved. "Here's what's going to happen," she said with the kind of authority that made Lucas understand how she'd survived 18 months of widowhood in Montana territory. "Tomorrow, when Harrison Company comes with their offer, we're going to listen politely. We're going to pretend to consider their proposal. And we're going to buy ourselves time to gather evidence and contact federal authorities who aren't corrupt." "That's dangerous," Jake protested. "If they suspect..." "Everything is dangerous at this point," Elena interrupted. "But I'm done being a victim. I'm done being protected by lies and manipulated by men who think I'm too weak or too stupid to handle the truth." She looked at Lucas with fierce determination. "You want to investigate this conspiracy, fine. Do it. But you do it with me as an active partner, not a helpless widow who needs saving. I know this ranch, these people, this territory. I can help you." Elena, both Jake and Lucas started to protest, but she cut them off. "No, this is my ranch, my son's future, my husband's murder to avenge. I will not be sidelined." Her voice carried the weight of every injustice she'd endured, every dismissal she'd suffered, every time she'd been told she was incapable simply because she was a woman. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Lucas recognized the futility of arguing. Elena Hartwell had reached the point where she would rather die fighting than live protected by lies. He understood that. He'd reached the same point 7 years ago when his own family died, and he dedicated himself to hunting the men responsible. "Together," he agreed, "but you follow my lead on anything that involves direct confrontation with the smugglers. I've been trained for this. You haven't." "Agreed, Abessamarine. As long as you consult with me on any decisions that affect my ranch or my son." "Deal." Thomas held up his slate arm. "What about me? What do I do?" Lucas and Elena exchanged glances. What role could a 10-year-old boy play in exposing a conspiracy? "You do what you've been doing for 18 months, Elena said gently. "You watch, you listen, and you write down everything you observe." But Thomas, she knelt down to look her son in the eyes. "You stay safe. No risks, no heroics. If anything scares you, you run and hide. Understood?" Thomas nodded solemnly, then wrote, I'm glad we're all together now. I was tired of keeping secrets alone. Lucas felt something crack in his chest. This child had been carrying the weight of his father's murder for 18 months, unable to speak about it, unable to share the burden, unable to seek help. No wonder he'd stopped talking. The secret had been too heavy for words. You're not alone anymore, Lucas promised, pulling the boy into a hug. None of us are. As they sat together in the kitchen, a widow, a traumatized child, a corrupt foreman seeking redemption, and a detective who'd come to destroy them, but stayed to protect them, Lucas realized that his mission had changed fundamentally. He was no longer investigating Elena Hartwell. He was defending her. And he would do whatever it took to keep her and Thomas safe, even if it meant sacrificing his career, his reputation, or his life. Because some things mattered more than cases and evidence. Some things were worth dying for. And the family sitting around this kitchen table was definitely worth dying for. The representative from Harrison Land Company arrived precisely at noon the next day, driving an expensive buggy pulled by matched bay horses that probably cost more than most Montana ranchers earned in a year. He was a tall man in his 50s, dressed in a suit that spoke of Denver money and Eastern education, with cold blue eyes that assessed the Hartwell Ranch like a predator sizing up prey. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy, I'm Richard Sterling, Senior Acquisitions Manager for Harrison Land Company. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Elena stood on the porch in her best dress, every inch the proper widow, receiving an unwelcome but necessary caller. Lucas stood slightly behind her, playing the role of hired hand, but positioned where he could intervene if Sterling proved threatening. Jake Morrison was conspicuously absent, having made himself scarce at Lucas's suggestion. No need to complicate things by having the foreman present when they were trying to appear cooperative. Mr. Sterling, Elena replied with cool politeness. Please come in. I have coffee prepared. They settled in this front parlor, a room Elena had clearly prepared for this meeting. The furniture was arranged to give her the position of power, the light from the windows positioned to blind visitors while leaving her in shadow. Small details, but they spoke of a mind that understood tactics. Lucas positioned himself near the door, hands clasped behind his back in a stance that looked passive, but allowed quick access to the gun hidden under his coat. I'll be direct, Mrs. Hartwell, Sterling began after accepting coffee he didn't drink. Harrison Land Company is prepared to offer you $8,000 for your ranch. That's well above market value for this property. It's also well below what this ranch is worth to me, Elena replied calmly. This is my home, Mr. Sterling, my son's inheritance. I'm not interested in selling. I understand sentiment, Mrs. Hartwell. Truly I do. Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. But you must see the practical difficulties of your situation. A woman alone trying to run a 5,000-acre ranch through Montana winters. The work is too much. The isolation is dangerous. Wouldn't you and your son be better off in Denver, living comfortably on the proceeds from the sale? My son and I are perfectly comfortable here. Are you? Sterling glanced around the parlor with obvious assessment. Forgive me, but this house shows signs of deferred maintenance. Your barn needs repairs. I saw at least 3 fence lines that are in poor condition. These are not the signs of a thriving operation, Mrs. Hartwell. Elena's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. Every ranch has maintenance needs, Mr. Sterling. That's hardly unusual. Perhaps not, but combined with your other difficulties, it paints a concerning picture. Other difficulties. Sterling pulled a folder from his satchel and laid it on the table between them. Harrison Land Company makes it our business to know about properties we're interested in acquiring. We know, for instance, that you've had trouble keeping hired hands. Most men don't want to work for a woman, especially one with a mute child. Lucas saw Elena flinch at the casual cruelty of the statement, and he had to forcibly restrain himself from crossing the room and throwing Sterling out bodily. We also know, Sterling continued, that you've been having difficulties with your foreman. Jake Morrison is loyal, but he's getting old, and an old foreman makes mistakes. Mistakes that could cost you livestock income, perhaps even lives. I wasn't aware my staffing choices were any of your business, Elena said, her voice like ice. They become our business when they affect the value of a property we wish to acquire. Sterling leaned forward. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm trying to help you. This ranch is too much for you to manage alone. Harrison Land Company is offering you a generous right out before things get worse. Worse how? The threat was delivered so smoothly that someone not listening carefully might have missed it. But Lucas heard it clearly, and so did Elena. Accidents happen on ranches, Mrs. Hartwell. Barn fires, livestock diseases, workers who get hurt and can't perform their duties. Sterling's voice remained pleasant conversational. It would be tragic if something happened to your property or your people simply because you were too stubborn to accept help when it was offered. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Sterling. Not a threat, a concern. Sterling sat back, his expression sympathetic. I've seen what happens to isolated ranches when they refuse protection. It's not pleasant. Protection from whom? From the realities of frontier life, from the men who prey on weakness, from circumstances that can overwhelm even the strongest person. Sterling paused. We live in dangerous times, Mrs. Hartwell. A wise woman knows when to accept assistance. Lucas had heard enough. He stepped forward, his presence suddenly more menacing than passive. I think Mrs. Hartwell has made her position clear, he said quietly. She's not interested in selling. Perhaps you should respect that and leave. Sterling turned cold eyes on Lucas. And you are, I'm the hired hand who doesn't take kindly to men threatening his employer. I see. Sterling's gaze moved between Lucas and Elena with calculating assessment. You've hired protection. How prudent, though I wonder if one man is enough to safeguard such a large property from all possible threats. That's my concern, not yours, Elena said, standing. Thank you for your offer, Mr. Sterling, but my answer is no. This ranch is not for sale, not now, and not in the foreseeable future. Sterling stood as well, gathering out his folder with unhurried precision. I'm disappointed, Mrs. Hartwell. I truly am. Harrison Land Company prides itself on acquiring properties through fair negotiation. We prefer not to resort to alternative methods. Then don't resort to them, Elena said flatly. Simply accept that some things aren't for sale and move on to other opportunities. Some things perhaps, but not this ranch. Sterling's mask slipped slightly, revealing the predator beneath. Harrison Land Company needs this property, Mrs. Hartwell. We will acquire it one way or another. The only question is whether you and your son will be compensated for it or not. Lucas moved to stand beside Elena, his hand resting visibly on his gun. I think you should leave now. Of course, I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome. Sterling donned his hat and moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Hartwell. Your foreman, Jake Morrison. He's been with you a long time, hasn't he? 10 years, Elena confirmed warily. Loyalty is admirable. But you might want to ask yourself why a man like Jake would stay with a struggling ranch when he could earn better wages elsewhere. Sterling's smile was poisonous. Men rarely stay out of loyalty alone. Usually there's profit involved. He left without waiting for a response, climbing into his expensive buggy and driving away with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards. Elena stood on the porch until the buggy disappeared from sight, her body rigid with controlled fury. Then she turned to Lucas, her brown eyes blazing. That was a threat against Jake. Yes, they know he's the weak link. They're trying to drive a wedge between you. Lucas guided her back inside, checking the windows to ensure they weren't being watched. Or they're planning to eliminate him before he can betray them. We need to warn him. He's already warned. I had him hide in the root cellar during the meeting, but he could hear everything through the air vents. Lucas moved to the kitchen where Jake was emerging from the cellar entrance. Did you hear it all? Every word. Jake's face was grim. Sterling just signed my death warrant. They know I'm a liability. Then we need to move fast, Lucas said. How long before Harrison Company makes good on their threats? A week, maybe less. They'll want to make an example of Elena to discourage other ranchers from resisting. Jake ran a hand through his graying hair. They'll probably start with the livestock. Poison a few cattle, make it look like disease. Then escalate from there. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, his slate in hand. He'd been listening from upstairs, Lucas realized. The boy wrote quickly. We should fight them, like in the stories where the good people defeat the bad people. This isn't a story, sweetheart. Elena said gently. These are real men with real guns who've already killed your father. I know, Thomas wrote, but Mr. Lucas is a real detective. And Mama is really brave. And Mr. Jake knows all their secrets. That should count for something. Out of the mouths of babes. Lucas found himself smiling despite the gravity of their situation. The boy's right, he said. We have advantages Sterling doesn't know about. He thinks you're alone and vulnerable. He doesn't know you have a Pinkerton detective, a foreman willing to turn state's evidence and documentation of a smuggling operation that reaches into the territorial government. Documentation I need to send to my supervisor. Lucas continued, his mind already working through logistics. But I can't risk regular mail. It's too easy to intercept. I can ride to Fort Benton, Jake offered. There's a federal telegraph office there that Harrison Company doesn't control. I can send a wire to Pinkerton headquarters and request immediate assistance. That's a 3-day ride in winter conditions, Elena protested. And Sterling's men will be watching for exactly that kind of move. Then we create a distraction. Lucas was already forming a plan. Elena, what if you appeared to reconsider Sterling's offer? Send a message saying you want to negotiate further, asking for a few days to think it over. They won't believe I changed my mind that quickly. They will if you seem desperate enough. Tell them you've had unexpected expenses, that a barn roof collapsed in last night's snow, that you need the money immediately. Lucas looked at Jake. Meanwhile, Jake rides out under cover of checking on cattle in the north pasture. By the time Harrison Company realizes he's gone, he'll be at Fort Benton sending telegraphs. And if they catch him, they won't, because I'm going to make sure they're too busy watching me and Elena to notice Jake is missing. Thomas wrote on his slate, "What about me? What can I do?" Lucas knelt down to the boy's level. "You can be our eyes and ears, just like we discussed. Watch for anyone approaching the ranch. Keep track of what you see. And most importantly, if anything goes wrong, you get your mother to safety." "How will I do that if I can't talk?" "Oi, you don't need words for courage, Thomas. And you've already proven you have more courage than most grown men." The boy's face flushed with pride at the praise. He wrote, "I won't let Mama down." "I know you won't." They spent the next several hours preparing. Elena composed a carefully worded message to Sterling, expressing interest in further negotiations. Jake packed supplies for a hard ride to Fort Benton, including the documentation of the smuggling operation that Lucas had compiled. Lucas himself cleaned and loaded every weapon on the ranch, preparing for the possibility that Harrison Company would move faster than anticipated. As dusk fell, Thomas came running into the house with his slate held high. 4 riders coming up the valley road. They looked like the bad men from town. Lucas and Jake exchanged glances. Sterling wasn't wasting time. "Elena, take Thomas to the root cellar," Lucas ordered. "Jake, get ready to ride out the back way. I'll deal with whoever's coming." "No," Elena said firmly. "We agreed no more protecting me by leaving me ignorant. If they're coming for a fight, I'm part of it." "Elena." "No, Lucas. This is my ranch. My fight." She retrieved her rifle from above the fireplace and checked it with practiced efficiency. Besides, they're less likely to shoot if a woman is present. Even frontier criminals have some sense of propriety. Lucas wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility. Elena Hartwell had been dismissed and protected and sidelined her entire marriage. She wasn't going to accept it anymore, not even from someone trying to keep her safe. "Fine. But you stay behind me, and if I tell you to take cover, you do it immediately." "Agreed." They met the riders on the porch, Elena and Lucas presenting a united front, while Jake slipped out the back to begin his ride north. Thomas watched from an upstairs window, his slate ready to record everything he witnessed. The 4 men who dismounted in the yard were exactly what Lucas expected: hired guns with hard eyes and harder reputations. The kind of men who did Harrison Land Company's dirty work while the executives kept their hands clean. "Mrs. Hartwell," the leader said, though his eyes were on Lucas, "we're here to deliver a message from Mr. Sterling." "I received his message this afternoon," Elena replied coolly. "I don't require another. This is a different kind of message." The leader gestured, and his men spread out surrounding the porch in a tactical formation that spoke of military training. "Mr. Sterling wanted to make sure you understood the seriousness of your situation." "I understand perfectly. I'm a widow alone with a child, and your employer's threatening me to steal my property. Elena's voice carried across the yard. I also understand that threatening a woman and child makes you all cowards, regardless of how many guns you carry. The leader's eyes narrowed. Brave words, Mrs. Hartwell. But bravery won't keep you safe when things start happening. Accidents, fires, losses that can't be recovered from. Is that what happened to my husband? Elena demanded, her voice shaking with controlled fury. Was his death one of your accidents? The leader's expression shifted, slightly surprised, perhaps, that she knew or suspected the truth. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think Harrison Land Company has been using my ranch for smuggling, and when my husband discovered it, you killed him. Elena took a step forward, and Lucas had to admire her courage, even as he calculated how to protect her if this went violent. Well, I know everything now, and if anything happens to me or my son, information goes to federal authorities that will destroy your entire operation. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. They needed Harrison Land Company to believe Elena had insurance evidence stashed somewhere that would be released if she died. The leader studied her face for a long moment. You're lying. Am I? Are you willing to bet your operation on that assumption? Elena smiled coldly. My husband was friends with federal judges, territorial marshals, and military officers. Do you really think he didn't leave insurance in case something happened to him? Lucas saw the doubt creep into the leader's eyes. They couldn't be certain she was bluffing, and in their business, uncertainty meant risk. Mr. Sterling will want to know about this, the leader said finally. Tell Mr. Sterling that I'm willing to negotiate, but I negotiate from a position of strength now, not desperation. Elena's voice carried steel wrapped in silk. He has 3 days to make me a real offer, double his current price, and a guarantee that I can continue living on this ranch for as long as I choose. Otherwise, the information I have goes to authorities he can't control or corrupt. The leader remounted his horse, his men following suit. 3 days, Mrs. Hartwell. But understand, if you're bluffing, if there is no insurance, then you and your boy are already dead. It's just a matter of timing. They rode away into the gathering darkness, leaving Elena and Lucas alone on the porch. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elena's legs gave out, and Lucas caught her before she fell, supporting her weight, as the adrenaline that had kept her upright drained away. I've got you, he murmured, holding her steady. You did brilliantly. I threatened murderers and smugglers with evidence I don't have, Elena said, her voice shaking. How is that brilliant? Because you bought us the 3 days we need for Jake to reach Fort Benton and for Pinkerton agents to arrive. Lucas guided her inside, settling her in a chair by the fire. And because you showed them you are not helpless prey, that counts for something. Thomas came running down the stairs, his slate already covered in writing. Mama was so brave, she didn't even shake when the bad men threatened us. Your mama is the bravest woman I've ever met, Lucas agreed, brushing a strand of hair from Elena's pale face. Elena looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge and too much fear. What if they call my bluff? What if Sterling decides to kill us anyway? Then I'll stop them. How one man against an entire organization? I'm not just one man, I'm a Pinkerton detective with 7 years of experience hunting dangerous criminals. Lucas squeezed her shoulder gently. And more importantly, I'm a man who's already lost one family to violence. I'm not losing another. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. Elena stared at him, her brown eyes wide with surprise, and something that might have been hope. Lucas, I know, too soon, too complicated, too many lies between us. Lucas stood, needing distance, before he said something that would make this even more complicated. But it's the truth. You and Thomas matter to me. I'll protect you both, whatever it takes. Thomas tugged on Lucas's sleeve and held up his slate. Do you love mama children? They asked the questions adults were too scared to voice. Lucas looked at Elena, at this woman who'd been lied to by her husband, betrayed by her foreman, and threatened by criminals, but who still stood tall and fought for her home and her son. A woman who'd shown more courage in 2 days than most people managed in a lifetime. Did he love her? Could you fall in love in less than 48 hours? Or had he been falling since the moment she'd stood up to hired guns with nothing but a rifle and her own fierce determination? I care about your mama very much, Lucas said carefully. And I care about you, Thomas. You're both worth protecting. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was as close as Lucas could come to honesty without complicating an already impossible situation. Thomas smiled and wrote, "Good, because we care about you too." Lena stood her composure, mostly recovered. "Thomas, sweetheart, it's time for bed. Tomorrow will be a long day." "But Mama, no arguments. Upstairs wash up and I'll come tuck you in shortly." Thomas sighed but obeyed, pausing only to hug Lucas tightly before heading upstairs. When they were alone, Elena turned to Lucas with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for the lies and the truth, for the protection and the honesty, for staying when running would have been easier." "I'm not good at running anymore," Lucas admitted. "I spent 7 years running from my grief, from my failures, from the possibility of caring about anyone again. I'm tired of it." "What happened to your family?" Lucas had been expecting this question, but it still hit like a physical blow. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkness where threats lurked just beyond the firelight. "My wife Sarah and daughter Emma. Apache raiders attacked our homestead while I was away on cavalry business. By the time I got back—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The memory was still too raw even after 7 years. "I'm sorry," Elena said, and the genuine compassion in her voice made Lucas's throat tighten. "I hunted the men who did it, tracked them for 2 years across 3 territories, found them one by one and brought them to justice." Lucas's reflection in the window showed a man haunted by ghosts, but justice didn't bring them back. Revenge didn't ease the pain. "I was left with nothing but the work cases, investigations, hunts for criminals who preyed on the innocent." "Is that all this is to you, Siem?" "Another case." Lucas turned to face her. "It was. When I arrived yesterday morning, that you were a target to investigate. Thomas was a complication. This ranch was a crime scene, Braisvam." He took a step toward her. "But somewhere between your son's smile and your courage in the barn last night, everything changed." "Changed how?" "I started caring whether you lived or died. Started wanting to protect you, not because it was my job, but because the thought of you being hurt was unbearable." Lucas stopped a careful distance away, close enough to see the pulse beating at her throat, but far enough to give her space. "You asked Thomas if I loved you. I don't know. It's too soon, too complicated. But I know I haven't felt anything this close to alive since Sarah died. And that terrifies me almost as much as the men who want you dead." Elena closed the distance between them, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. "I'm terrified too," she whispered. "My husband lied to me for years. The man I trusted to run my ranch has been using it for smuggling. Everything I thought I knew about my life was built on deception." She looked up at him with eyes that held steel beneath the vulnerability. "But you're the first person who's been honest with me, brutally, painfully honest. Even when lying would have been easier." "Elena, no, let me finish." Her hand tightened on his shirt. "I don't know if what I'm feeling is love, or gratitude, or just the desperate need to have someone on my side for once in my life. But I know that when those men threatened Thomas tonight, you stepped in front of us without hesitation. I know that you've risked your career and possibly your life to protect people you barely know. And I know that when I look at you, I see a future I didn't think I'd ever have again." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't seem to know she was shedding. "You deserve better than a burned-out detective with more ghosts than prospects," he said roughly. "Maybe, but right now you're what I have, and that's enough." The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like something that had been building since the moment they'd met. Elena's lips were soft against his, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him closer. Lucas wrapped his arms around her, feeling her body fit against his like something that had always been missing. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss of lovers who couldn't wait. It was something slower, sweeter, more profound. A promise made without words, a commitment forged in crisis, a recognition that two broken people might be able to build something whole together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elena rested her forehead against his chest. "This is insane," she whispered. "We've known each other 2 days. There are men trying to kill us. My son just watched me kiss a stranger." "I'm not a stranger anymore," Lucas murmured into her hair. "And insanity seems to be our natural state." Elena laughed, the sound broken but genuine. "What happens when this is over?" when the criminals are arrested and the ranch is safe and you've closed your case? I don't know, Lucas admitted, but I'd like to find out, if you'll let me. Are you asking to court me properly, Mr. Reeves? I'm asking for a chance to see what we could be when we're not running for our lives. Lucas pulled back enough to see her face. I'm asking if you'd consider a future that includes a detective who's better at hunting criminals than ranching. Ranching can be learned, Elena said, smiling up at him. Besides, I need someone who can handle both cattle and criminals. Montana Territory seems to provide plenty of both. From upstairs came Thomas's voice, the first words he'd spoken aloud in 18 months. Mama Lucas, someone's burning the barn. They broke apart instantly, both running for the door. Through the kitchen window, Lucas could see flames already climbing the barn walls fed by hay and old wood. So much for 3 days. Harrison Land Company was making their move now. Get Thomas to the root cellar, Lucas ordered, grabbing his rifle. Don't come out until I give the all clear. No, I'm not hiding while you fight alone. Elena, please. Lucas gripped her shoulders, looking into her eyes with desperate intensity. I can't protect you and fight them at the same time. I need you safe so I can do what I was trained to do. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Thomas, she called upstairs. Root cellar now. As mother and son disappeared into the cellar, Lucas moved to the porch, his mind cataloging weapons positions and tactical advantages. The barn was already lost. Nothing could save it now. But he could prevent the fire from spreading to the house and other buildings. More importantly, he could make Harrison Land Company pay dearly for this attack. Men emerged from the darkness, 4 of them, the same hired guns who'd delivered threats earlier. They'd clearly expected their fire would flush Elena and Thomas from the house in panic, making them easy targets. They hadn't expected a Pinkerton detective who'd spent 7 years hunting men just like them. Lucas's first shot took the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him in the snow. The second shot shattered the lantern. One man was carrying, showering him with burning oil that sent him screaming into the darkness. The remaining 2 dove for cover, returning fire that splintered the porch railing inches from Lucas's head. He came up behind a water trough and fired twice more. One shot went wide, but the other caught a gunman in the leg. 3 down, 1 to go. But the last man had made it to the cover of the bunkhouse, and he was no amateur. Shots came in steady, measured bursts, pinning Lucas behind the trough, while the barn fire grew higher. Lucas calculated angles and odds. He was outgunned, but not outthought. The gunman was focused on the porch, expecting Lucas to stay pinned. He wouldn't be watching the side door. Moving quickly, Lucas circled through the house and emerged from the kitchen door, flanking the gunman's position. The man was so focused on keeping Lucas pinned that he never heard the approach. Drop it, Lucas said quietly, his rifle aimed at the gunman's back. The man froze, then slowly set down his weapon. Kick it away. Hands behind your head. The gunman complied, his face showing the resignation of someone who knew when he was beaten. Who sent you? Lucas demanded. Go to hell. Already been there, didn't care for it. Lucas moved closer, keeping his rifle trained on the man's center mass. Harrison Land Company sent you to burn the barn and kill the widow. I want to know who gave the order. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, after you tell me who's running the smuggling operation. I don't know what you're talking about. Lucas sighed. He didn't have time for this. The barn was fully engulfed now, and he needed to check on the other gunmen, secure the property, and make sure Elena and Thomas were safe. Here's how this works, he said conversationally. Federal agents are already on their way here. The foreman who's been running your smuggling operation has turned state's evidence. In about 48 hours, everyone involved in this conspiracy is going to be arrested. Lucas paused. You can cooperate now and maybe avoid a noose, or you can stay silent and hang with the rest of them. Your choice. The gunman's face went pale. Morrison talked. Jake Morrison is currently riding to Fort Benton with documentation of the entire operation. Names, dates, payment records, everything. It was mostly true, though Lucas was embellishing slightly. He'll testify against everyone involved in exchange for a lighter sentence. Meanwhile, you're facing charges of arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy, unless you give me something worth trading for. The gunman was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. Richard Sterling runs the local operation, but he takes orders from someone in the territorial government untamed. I don't know who they keep it compartmentalized. We just do the work, collect our pay, and don't ask questions. Who killed Charles Hartwell? I don't know. That was before my time. But the words, it was someone from the Canadian side. They wanted to send a message about ranchers who tried to quit the operation. Lucas felt cold rage settle in his chest. Charles Hartwell had been murdered not by Jake Morrison, but by someone even more removed from consequences. Someone who could order a man's death and never face justice for it. How many others are involved in this attack? Just us four. Sterling wanted it to look like an accidental fire, not a military assault. You failed at that, Lucas observed dryly. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made both men tense. Lucas swung his rifle toward the sound, then relaxed as he recognized Jake Morrison's voice calling out. Lucas, don't shoot. I'm bringing help. Jake rode into the yard with a man in a federal marshal's uniform, followed by 6 soldiers in cavalry blues. Lucas felt relief flood through him. And Jake, I thought you were riding to Fort Benton. I was, but I got about 5 miles out and ran into these gentlemen on their way here. Jake dismounted, gesturing to the marshal. Seems your Pinkerton supervisor sent them 3 days ago, Bo, when you missed your first scheduled check-in. The federal marshal approached with the kind of calm authority that came from years of dealing with frontier violence. Michael Reeves. Yes, sir. Marshal Grant Thomas, Denver office. We've been looking for you. Marshal Thomas surveyed the burning barn and the wounded gunman with professional assessment. It looks like you've been busy. You could say that, sir. These men were sent by Harrison Land Company to murder Elena Hartwell and her son. Lucas gestured toward the gunman he'd captured. This one has been very forthcoming about the smuggling operation. Has he? Marshal Thomas smiled grimly. Good, because we have arrest warrants for 15 men involved in this conspiracy, including Richard Sterling and several territorial officials. Your supervisor sent us your initial reports along with the request for assistance. Lucas felt the weight he'd been carrying since arriving in Montana start to lift. Help had arrived, actual legitimate help from federal authorities who couldn't be corrupted or intimidated. There's a woman and boy in the root cellar, he said. Elena Hartwell and her son Thomas. They need protection. We'll see to it. Marshal Thomas gestured to his soldiers. Sergeant, secure these prisoners. Corporal, help with that fire before it spreads to other buildings. As the soldiers moved to follow orders, Lucas ran to the house and opened the root cellar door. Elena Thomas, it's safe now. Federal marshals are here. Elena emerged with Thomas clinging to her side, both of them covered in dirt and cobwebs, but unharmed. When she saw Lucas, her face crumpled with relief. You're alive, she breathed. I promised to protect you, Lucas replied, pulling her into a hug that included Thomas. I keep my promises. The barn is gone, but we're all alive. The house is safe, and the men who attacked us are in custody. Lucas looked at Marshal Thomas. Sir, this is Elena Hartwell, owner of this ranch, and her son, Thomas. Marshal Thomas removed his hat respectfully. Ma'am, I'm sorry about your barn, but I'm glad you and your boy are safe. Elena nodded, seeming overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Lucas kept his arm around her, providing the support she'd been without for too long. What happens now? She asked. Now we arrest everyone involved in the smuggling operation, Marshal Thomas said. We'll need statements from all of you, documentation of everything that's happened. It'll take time, but justice will be served. Thomas tugged on Lucas's sleeve and held up his slate, the writing shaky from adrenaline. Did we win? Lucas smiled at the boy. Yes, Thomas, we won. 6 months later, spring came to the Hartwell Ranch with a gentleness that seemed designed to erase the harsh memories of winter. The barn had been rebuilt larger and sturdier than before, funded in part by the federal government's compensation for damages incurred during their investigation. Elena stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Thomas work with the new horses they'd purchased last month. Her son's voice carried across the yard as he called instructions to the animals, the 18 months of silence finally broken and healing. Lucas emerged from the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up his face, showing the tan of someone who'd spent the spring learning to ranch properly. He'd resigned from the Pinkerton agency 2 months ago, choosing a different kind of life than the one he'd built after his family's death. He'd chosen a life with Elena and Thomas. The north fence is finished, he called out as he approached the porch, and I talked to the new foreman about expanding the herd next year. Elena smiled. They'd hired Bill Jackson as foreman after Jake Morrison went to prison for his role in the smuggling operation. Jake had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony, 10 years instead of life, and had written to Elena twice expressing his remorse and his hopes that she could forgive him someday. She was still working on that. Thomas wants to know if you'll teach him to ride the new mare, Elena said as Lucas joined her on the porch. The one he named Lightning, even though she's the slowest horse we own. That's the one. Lucas laughed and Elena marveled at how much lighter he seemed now. The ghosts that had haunted him were still there. They probably always would be, but they no longer controlled him. He'd found a way to live again instead of just existing. I'll teach him after dinner, Lucas promised. But first, there's something I wanted to discuss with you. Elena felt a flutter of nerves. Lucas's tone was serious, but not worried, suggesting this was something important but not dangerous. What is it? Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught. 6 months ago, I came to this ranch under false pretenses, Lucas said quietly. I lied to you, deceived you, and planned to investigate you for crimes you didn't commit. Not the best beginning for a courtship. No, Elena agreed, her heart racing. Not the best. But somewhere between your courage and Thomas's trust, I fell in love with you both. Lucas opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. You deserve better than a former detective who's still learning which end of a cow to brand. But I'm hoping you'll take a chance on me anyway. Elena stared at the ring, feeling tears blur her vision. Lucas Reeves, are you proposing to me? Michael Reeves, actually. I figured if we're starting fresh, I should use my real name. He smiled. And yes, Elena Hartwell. I'm asking you to marry me, to build a life together on this ranch with that remarkable boy of yours, to take a chance that two broken people can make something whole together. I don't want you to give up who you are, Elena protested, even as joy flooded through her. You're a detective, Lucas Michael. You're brilliant at it. You shouldn't have to stop because of me. I'm not stopping. I'm redirecting. Michael pulled a letter from his other pocket. Marshal Thomas offered me a position as territorial deputy marshal. It would involve investigating crimes, but from here with this as my base instead of living out of hotel rooms across 3 territories. You'd still be in danger. Sometimes, but I'd come home to you and Thomas instead of an empty room and whiskey. Michael's voice roughened with emotion. I spent 7 years running from the possibility of having a family again. I don't want to run anymore, Elena. I want to build a life with you. If you'll have me. Elena took the ring from the box with trembling fingers. This is insane. We've known each other 6 months. We met because you were investigating me for federal crimes. All true, Michael agreed. But also true, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. You make me want to be better than I was. And when I think about the future, you and Thomas are in every vision I have. Thomas, Elena said suddenly, remembering her son. She looked across the yard to where he was watching them with barely contained excitement. Did you know about this? Thomas held up his slate, grinning. He asked my permission yesterday. I said yes, if he promised to teach me detective work. Elena laughed through her tears. You conspired against me. We conspired for you, Michael corrected gently. There's a difference. Elena looked at this man who'd come to her ranch as a liar and stayed as a protector who'd risked everything to keep her and Thomas safe, who'd chosen love over duty and healing over revenge. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Michael's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that promised forever, despite all the complications and dangers and uncertainties that lay ahead. When they broke apart, Thomas was there hugging them both with the fierce enthusiasm of a child who'd been given back his family. So I can call you Papa now, he asked Michael hopefully. I'd be honored if you did, Michael replied, ruffling the boy's dark hair. Good, because Mama and I decided we're keeping you. Thomas's expression turned serious. But you have to promise something. What's that? Promise you'll stay, that you won't leave like Papa did, that you'll be here for birthdays and Christmas and teaching me to be a detective and all the important things. Michael knelt down to Thomas's level, looking the boy in the eyes with solemn intensity. Thomas Hartwell, I promise I will spend the rest of my life being the father you deserve and the husband your mother needs. I promise I will protect this family with everything I have. And I promise that the only way I'm leaving this ranch is if you and your mother ask me to go." Thomas nodded, satisfied. Then he grinned. "Can we have a dog? Every good detective needs a dog." "Thomas," Elena protested, but she was laughing. "We can discuss the dog," Michael said diplomatically. After the wedding, as the three of them stood together on the porch of the rebuilt ranch, Elena realized that sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as the worst disasters. If Lucas Michael hadn't come to investigate her, if the smuggling operation hadn't been exposed, if all the lies and dangers hadn't forced them together, she would have spent the rest of her life alone, never knowing what it felt like to be truly partnered rather than protected. She'd spent her marriage being decorative and dismissed. She'd spent her widowhood being threatened and deceived. But now she was building something new, a partnership based on honesty and trust, courage and love. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, strengthened by adversity and proven by shared trials. The fake cowboy had turned out to be a real detective. The widow had turned out to be a warrior. The mute boy had found his voice. And together they discovered that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about being too broken to love again. Because the truth was simpler and more profound. Love wasn't about being perfect or whole or undamaged. Love was about finding someone willing to stand beside you in the darkness and fight their way toward the light. And that was exactly what they'd found in each other. Thank you for joining Michael, Elena, and Thomas on their journey from deception to truth, from danger to safety, and from loneliness to love. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful families are forged in the crucible of shared courage, and that real love is found not in perfect circumstances, but in the choice to stand together against impossible odds. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and redemption set against the backdrop of the Montana Territory, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming stories of frontier families who prove that love and courage can overcome any obstacle. What other adventures would you like to see our Western families face? Let us know in the comments below, and until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose honesty over deception, love over fear, and hope over despair. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about being beyond redemption. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.